not, they're not, there's something that they're not distinguishing there.
I love how you put it where you're saying you need to separate the government finances from the economy. They're
Yeah,
two completely separate things.
yeah,
And if we keep thinking that government finances equals economy, you're wrong. It's just wrong.
yeah. And that it's the same mistake that the MMTers make that the Austrians also make. So the MMTers say, because they're thinking of it as the same thing, we need more. They just say, we need more deficits, we need more. The Austrians say, no, 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 no. And they also think it's the same thing. And they say, we need less. You need to spend less, you need to borrow less. The MMTers are saying, when you need to spend more, you need to borrow more. I'm saying that the correct view, which synthesizes the whole picture and separates those two things, is that the economy needs more spending. And at the same time, it is actually a good thing to get the government budgets more like in order. And those two things are a little bit connected because right now from as a whole, as a continuation of Keynesian economics, like everybody thinks that when the economy is bad, you have the government borrow money. And that worked for the Great Depression, but when you bring it to the current era and you're doing it more and more, you've reached the end of the effectiveness, and you're getting to a point where it's a little bit bad for the government finances, and it's also not effective for the economy because it's not being directed. It's not going to UBI. It's not going to the bottom of the economy. I'm not an expert on these government things, but I will just say that I don't know how efficient government spending is. And if the government spending, if large portions of it, for instance, like with PPP, are actually going to the top of the economy, or like with bailouts, if all that money is going to the corporations, the capitalists, well, then you're making the problem worse and you're ruining government finance at the same time. So in conclusion, what you need to do again is that separation. The economy does need money. It needs money at the bottom, not the top. And the government finances would definitely be worth sort of making it more sustainable. But that is definitely like less important than getting money to the bottom of the economy. If you don't get money to the bottom of the economy, if you do what the Austrians want and you start and you like cut off the spending and stuff, you're just going to have the economy crash. And when the economy crashes, that's not going to be good for your finances either, because your tax revenues are going to go way down.
Well, but then the Austrians will say we couldn't have had it anywhere different if this was the only thing that could have happened.
Yeah, they're wrong
Sorry.
about that. They're
Sorry,
wrong.
I can't.
That's sort of what happened during the Great Depression in FDR, is that he started off with being willing to spend money and run deficits. But around
Yeah,
1937, 1938, he lost faith and he went back to balancing the budget and caused another recession
right,
back then. But
right.
the other thing I was gonna say is, you talked about deflation in American history at the end of the 19th century. And so the Democrats nominated this guy named William Jennings Bryan to run for president in
Yeah,
1896. And one of his big issues was free silver, to increase
yeah,
the money supply that way. And so
yeah,
he's got a great quote. He said, if you legislate to make the masses prosperous, their prosperity will find its way up through every class which rests upon them. And that's
absolutely.
what we need to do today. That's sort
That,
of
that's right.
the precursor of a trickle up economy.
Yeah, and absolutely, that's absolutely right. One of the things is that in that era, with the deflationary money and the money that gets stronger and stronger in value over time. One of the things that is that in that era, um, it would have been more like capitalists, people with money would be more willing to save their wealth in money and less willing to go into debt. And so in that era, the people that were in debt that William Jennings Bryan was talking to were all these like small, farmers, um, that were getting into debt because their business model was getting run over by productivity growth in
Right.
agriculture. And then when they got into a really bad problem, then they had no other choice but to go to the bank and say, "Oh, sorry, I need a loan." And so, and then deflation would crush them more because their loan value would get larger and larger in real terms. So William Jennings Bryan in the silver movement, in a way, that is actually analogous to UBI today. So during that time when you were in a hard money thing, and that was being hard on your bottom, half of your economy, that is a correct solution. That's a good solution. Like soften the money so that the debtors at the bottom, like give them a break. That's going to be good, and that works. But now that we're in 2000, it no longer works because again now all the debt's at the top. Like the people at the top figured out, whoa, debt is really helpful, when the currency is depreciating in value. So now everybody at the top, all the companies, everything, they know to use lots and lots of debt. And the system has not adapted yet. And so where it started off helping out the bottom, now the same action is helping out the top. And now what you actually need is monetary UBI. And you could actually like sort of cut off a little bit of that traditional monetary policy. You can actually let the interest rate rise a little bit as you're giving, monetary UBI to the bottom,
Right.
because there's too much at the top, and it's no good because the capitalists, they're not incentivized to build production when the bottom doesn't have money to buy it. So instead, they just you end up with like these unstable bubble games. It's all about like, if Elon Musk tweets about Dogecoin, well, a bunch of people like jump into Dogecoin, then he's going to make lots of money as the price goes up. Yeah, it's an unstable bubble game due to excess stagnant capital at the top that has nowhere to go.
Yeah, we've talked about what government could do to try and stabilize these cycles, but I think at the end of the day, what we want government to do is to make sure the people are taken care of.
Yeah,
Make sure
absolutely.
that, the people of the country are prosperous, and
Yeah.
UBI is the easiest, simplest way to establish an economic floor.
Absolutely. And it's such an incredible thing. At one of the BBI podcasts, I pointed out that, if you were to take, right now we have like $60,000 GDP per capita. That's how much we produce. That's how wealthy we are currently. And if you imagine that, like in 200 years, that increases by 100-fold. So in 200 years later, like we're producing $6 million per capita. That's our production in 200 years. And you ask the question, 200 years from now, are we still going to have poverty? And I think everybody would be really surprised if you said yes. They'd be like, how? No way, $6 million per person? Like, no way you can have poverty when you have $6 million per person in production. Everybody's going to be rich. But then if you go back 200 years ago, GDP was 100 times less than it was today. It was $600 a year at that time. And people managed to survive. It was mostly just feeding themselves and having clothes. But, they managed to survive. But if you asked them at the time, and they had poverty at the time, but if you said 200 years from now, there's going to be $60,000 per person worth of production, are there going to be poor people? And they would be like, no, you're crazy. $60,000 per year, that is a fortune. Obviously, everybody's going to be rich. And it's this, enormous, like, this is really absurd that we still have poverty and everybody's like used to it. So they think that is sort of normal. They just assume that that's normal because that's how it's always been. But when you think about it, that makes no sense. We're producing 100 times more production than we were 100 years ago, and people survived then. How do we not have a population that is, everybody is at least like able to feed themselves, clothe themselves, and house themselves with absolutely no, like it should just not be an issue in our current economy.
So Keynes looked at this back in 1930. He wrote a short article. I forget the exact title, something about the opportunities for our grandchildren. And he predicted by 2030 that we could have 15-hour work weeks, because just enough to make us feel like we were doing something, keep an